Good morning, everyone. Now, I've mentioned before that I was a counselor at Ionian Village back in 2014. And when you are a counselor at the summer camp Ionian Village, you are assigned to one of three committees. You are either on the Arts and Crafts Committee, you are on the Music and Culture Committee, or you are on the Athletics Committee. And in 2014, I was placed on this Athletics Committee. Now, each committee is in charge of planning and organizing various activities for the kids of the camp. And each committee has one very large event towards the end of camp that is it's a very involved and exciting event to put on. And the large event for the Athletics Committee to host was none other than the Olympics, of course. Now, planning the Olympics takes a lot of work and effort. However, as days went by at camp, my fellow athletics committee members and I did not plan our Olympics event. Instead, we seemed to just simply enjoy each other's pareja, and we relaxed and socialized during our downtime at the camp. Now, the day of Olympics was fast approaching, and my committee still hadn't done any planning. There was an old basic outline on file in the camp office somewhere, and we simply figured that we would use that and host the Olympics. Now, the priest in charge of Ionian Village at that time was a priest named Father Evagoras. And the day before the Olympics was to happen, Father Evagoras caught wind that my entire committee had been asleep on the job and that we had not done our work or preparation, and he became very angry. Yes, he did, actually. And I remember being fast asleep and getting woken up at 1 a.m. by one of my friends. My friend told me, "Get up, Christo, we have to go to the front office." And Father Evagoras now had gathered the entire Olympics committee around a table. He threw away the old outdated plan that we were planning to use, and he demanded that we come up with a new plan and we work as long as it took to do so, even if it took all night long. So after the dust had settled, my committee and I got to work. We planned, we brainstormed, we created costumes, we ran through prospective games, and we even wrote a whole script for the event. We worked on this until about 5 o'clock in the morning. And the next day came, and it was finally time for the Olympics. So we set our plan in motion. All the kids came out and they competed in games. My committee members and I carried out our plan and hosted all the games and awarded the prizes and made all the announcements. And we had a lot of fun. Later that night, after the Olympics were over and after all the kids had gone back to their cabins to go to bed, it was time for our much-awaited review from Father Evagoras. Now, we didn't know which way this performance review would go, and so we anxiously awaited his feedback. Finally, he came to the table where we were all gathered, and he told us that our Olympics was the best Olympics in the history of Ionian Village. In fact, I hear that the blueprint my committee and I came up with is the blueprint that all other athletics committees are required to use at Ionian Village to this very day. Now, the lesson learned from this little example at Ionian Village is that in order to accomplish great things, we must roll up our sleeves and do a little work. In life, we can become satisfied with the status quo, or perhaps even worse than the status quo, we can become satisfied with mediocrity or subpar standards. Or sometimes we might even sit back and expect God himself to take care of our problems for us. And how often do we sit back thinking that God will take care of something without putting forth any effort ourselves, perhaps? Today's gospel passage is a well-known one. It is the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 with loaves and fish. However, while the miracle itself is well known, Rarely do we stop and look to see how the miracle actually works. When we do look closely, we see that in order for great things to happen, or for even miracles from God to happen, it requires work, participation, and some kind of action on our part. In today's gospel passage, we find Christ towards the end of delivering his famous Sermon on the Mount. And there were thousands of people present who had been outside listening to him preach all day long. And as you can imagine now, these people had grown very tired and hungry. So the disciples looked around and started to notice this, and they said to Jesus, "The day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." This was the quick solution to the problem. This was the easy response. Much like my committee's resolution to use the pre-existing outline for our Olympics, the disciples were content with taking the easy way out. However, Christ pushes his disciples to do something great. He pushes them to do something that sounded impossible when he says to them, "They need not go away, you give them something to eat." And we know the rest of the story. The disciples bring 5 loaves and 2 fish to Christ, which he lifts to heaven and he blesses. Then the disciples distribute the blessed food to the crowds. And miraculously, the thousands upon thousands of people that were all there ate and were satisfied, as it says. In fact, not only were all the people satisfied, but they even had leftovers after everyone had eaten. Now, Jesus did not simply make the people's hunger go away by divine magic. Rather, Christ feeds them. He blessed the only food they had and fed 5,000 men plus women and children from this food. The food doesn't miraculously appear on each plate, but rather the disciples had to go out and distribute it. The disciples had to work to make sure the people were fed. Christ received from his disciples the food which some people had worked to make possible, the bread and the fish. And he takes this human-made food, working together for the good of all the people. This is the whole idea behind the church. People working together with God to accomplish great things. Christ entrusts some problems to us, his modern-day disciples, and asks us to deal with these problems. He doesn't miraculously make problems go away. He says to us, "I'm not taking hunger away, but I empower you to do the work necessary for these people to feel cared and fed." The disciples themselves had to provide the food and then go out and distribute it. So too must we work to provide solutions and implement them. And as long as our work is blessed by God, there is no limit to the amazing things we can accomplish. But therein lies the trick. Is our work blessed by God? Do we put forth effort with his will in mind? Do we ask him to strengthen us and guide us in our efforts? Or do we fruitlessly spin our wheels, formulating plans without regard for him? There's always work to be done in our own lives, bettering our health, strengthening relationships with others. There is certainly work to be done in our community as well. We're always talking about increasing Sunday attendance, hosting social events, the festival, fundraising, completing a building project. The list certainly goes on. Today's gospel passage is a reminder that for great things to happen in our lives and in our church, we must roll up our sleeves like the disciples and do a little work ourselves. God's blessings will come upon us when we work with him, when we seek to do his will, and when we ask him to bless our efforts. Therefore, let everything we do in our lives be guided and blessed by him. Because when we combine our efforts with God's blessings, there is no limit to what we can accomplish in our lives and in our church. Amen.